Hi, my name is Robert Morgan. We're continuing with the history of the Church of Egypt and Christianity in Egypt. We're starting in the 6th century. Actually, the 6th century is not a lot of happenings occurred in the 6th century. One of the prominent things that happened was the Persian invasion on Egypt happened in 501. They entered through Alexandria. They attacked the land of Egypt. Persian soldiers actually overran until the Delta and took over a large part of the northern part of the country. It was under the rule of Emperor Anastasius, and the Roman soldiers again beat them out of Egypt. But at the same time, Egypt had a lot of catastrophes occurring, basically famine, a lot of poverty, a lot of natural disasters that occurred at the same time, which decreased the strength of Egypt at the time. A few popes took power at the time over the See of St. Mark. As an example, Pope John II, Pope Dioscorus II, the 31st Pope of Alexandria. There was still the struggle between Nestorianism and Orthodoxy occurring in the world. Basically, a lot of the emperors still adopted the Nestorian beliefs. Some of them held on to that belief. The most urging question at the time was the division between the churches according to the Chalcedonian belief. The two natures versus the one nature of Christ. Again, the church in Egypt held on to the one nature of Christ. They were branded as monophysites versus we branded them diphysites, adopting the two natures of Christ. Basically, the rift in the church continued at the time. Again, the Roman emperors incepted or started a church in Egypt, the Byzantine church in Egypt, which controlled most of the financial gain in Egypt and collected from all the churches the money. The emperor or the ruling Romans persecuted the Egyptians by confiscating their churches and giving them to the Byzantine churches and Byzantine priests versus the Egyptian priests or the Coptic priests and the Coptic Pope. At the time, a lot of the popes were like fugitives. They were banished out of Alexandria. They had to hide in monasteries. A lot of people were persecuted according to their belief. Again, it's Christians versus Christians at the time. The Copts adopted, it's like having two parties in the country. The Copts adopted even a national color, which was the green, versus the blue, which was adopted by the Romans or the Greeks at the time, or the Greeks that lived in Egypt were the Byzantines. They had like two parties, and each party held on to their beliefs and to their color, and it was basically rivalry between them as to the control of Egypt and to the control of the churches and the control of the papacy and the control of everything that was gained from the people. The people were taxed to the extent that they had no money, and there was a lot of poverty and famine in Egypt. This occurred for most of the 5th and 6th century, actually. The Roman Empire was seen at the time to be falling apart. It was basically tearing at the seams, and their power declined mostly after the 5th century. As an empire that ruled most of the known world, it became too big for its own good, to the point that they divided the empire among Eastern and Western empires, and then again further, the Eastern Empire was divided further among lesser emperors. That decreased further its power, the power of Rome. But the churches was another thing. The Church of Rome was always vying to control the known world and Christianity and vied for the leadership position versus the original Church of Alexandria and Church of Antioch were the oldest. It was basically five major churches that controlled the world of Christianity at the time. Alexandria was always the strongest and produced the most learned popes and priests and clergy, followed by the rest of the churches. But at the end, power won over and Rome won over, making it difficult for the popes of Egypt, which were basically treated as fugitives, and they always had to defend their positions. This doesn't mean that the Egyptians were accepting all this. They actually revolted several times against the Roman emperors and against the Roman rule. On several occasions, the people of Egypt resisted the Roman rule and tried to overthrow their. Just to close up by the 6th century, it's just very important to say that the Egyptians, the national Egyptians, or the true Egyptians, the Copts of Egypt, were dissatisfied with their Roman rulers to the point that they were looking for alternatives to the rule and were trying to overthrow the yoke of the Byzantine Empire. It was an ailing empire. It was an old empire that ruled over so many centuries and over so many parts of the known world. It was getting old, and the people were really dissatisfied with their persecution according to their religion. And this was the premise for the start of the 7th century and the start of the Arab invasion of Egypt. Thank you.